Okay, thank you for joining us today for this month's webinar in our free monthly webinar series. As I run through what you're looking at on the screen, if you have not downloaded the MBCEA app yet to your phone, I would like you to point your camera at the appropriate QR code. If you have an iPhone, it's the one on the left. If you have an Android, it's the one on the right. And I want you to download the MBCEA app. The same credentials that you use to log into mbcea.org are the same credentials to log into the app. So we really want you to start using it. There are forums where if you've got a question for another member, we ask you to put it there instead of emailing me and asking me what other members would do. Ask them directly and engage through the app. And for the conference as well, we use that. You can direct message other app users. So it is a very, very handy and very useful. And I ask you to not turn off your push notifications because we promise not to overwhelm you. 1 or 2 a week is all we will send when there's something important that we want you to see on the app. And then if you haven't registered for the conference yet, we encourage you to do so. Registration closes April 7th. The room block is almost full. So please get your hotel reservations. And the next thing that's coming up April 9th is our new member quarterly roundtable. Whether you have been a member forever or if you're brand new, I would encourage you to sign up. I run through all of your member benefits. There are a lot of pages in our website that you may not have visited. You may not be familiar with every one of the member resources or the benefits. So it's a great refresher or an orientation into membership. April 11th, the Greater Ohio chapter is hosting a virtual event about overhead cranes, and they are inviting the entire membership to that virtual event. So we're going to use that as our monthly webinar series in April. So I encourage you to visit that event on our website and sign up for that. And then our next month's webinar series free session will be a code update. And so I encourage you to sign up for that. When you're on our event page, there are several other chapter events going on over the next couple of months. So please review everything on the event page. So I am going to stop sharing now. I'm going to introduce Craig Schaefer. He will introduce himself a little more. He is also going to be presenting at the conference for the field track on the 3rd day. Talking a little more about OSHA and doing some training as well. All right, Craig, the floor is yours.
All right, let me get this baby rolling here. Okay, so folks, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're at. Appreciate you tuning in. We're going to talk a little bit about OSHA Update 2025 here. And Sasha mentioned this is something, it'll be a part of what I discuss here at the annual meeting coming up. We'll have more time to get into more details with certain things, but this is a nice overview now. It's kind of like predicting the lottery. These things that I'm going to talk about, some of the stuff is fact, and some of it is just kind of taking some wild guesses. I look back in preparing this. I look back at the update we did in 2021, and just to see how things panned out. Back then, looking at what we thought might happen, and then what really did happen, and a lot of the stuff that was discussed come true. But there were a number of items that never made it to the table, and that's pretty normal. So as we go along, just a few things I want to update you here on some leadership changes that are happening with the change in administration. We'll talk about where things are starting at. Anytime you have a change in administration, you're going to have a change in how OSHA as a portion of the Department of Labor operates and what their philosophies are. So we'll talk about where we're starting there. And then I have a little segment here called Tea Leaves. This just kind of talks about some more of the specifics that we might see. And although we might see changes from a high level in terms of, regulation and enforcement and outreach, there's some things that are likely not to change. falls continue to be the number one cause of death in construction. So it makes sense that fall protection in construction is still going to be emphasized. So that's one of several things we'll talk about when we get to that point. As we're going along here, on my iPad here as I'm doing this, the chat screen does not show up. I do have it on a computer behind me. I'm going to glance up here every so often, but I have asked Sasha just to kind of keep an eye on it. If I'm missing something that somebody's asking, I'll, just by all means, Sasha, interrupt me at any time, and I'll try to answer the question. So let me get started here, I guess, just with an overview. Again, when you have change in administration, you have a pendulum that can swing back and forth. And over many years that, has swung, when Republicans were in office, it was a more business friendly environment. When Democrats are in office, a more worker focused environment in a Department of Labor. And that still holds true today, although to differing and varying degrees. It's kind of an interesting situation unfolding at this point. There is new leadership. I'm going to mention some of the main people here in just a minute, but there is a Secretary of Labor who has been confirmed by the Senate, Lori Chavez DeRemer. And I'll just say a few things about her in just a minute. But I mean, she does have a labor background, so it's not something you would typically associate with a Republican administration. So this new Department of Labor leadership does bring to the table certainly folks that are appreciated by industry, and I'll explain that as here in this segment with the folks that have either been confirmed or nominated, but they also bring some labor support as well. And again, the Secretary of Labor has labor support. So it's somewhat of an interesting combination, but it's, from a safety standpoint, it's probably the best we can ask for. We all want to keep workers safe. I think we all generally, abhor regulations that are administratively burdened. I'm a safety director. Most of you folks, or a lot of you folks, maybe have run across me in times past. Half of what I do is train. For what I do, I'm a safety director for contractors in my area. I'm in the South Central Pennsylvania area, but I believe in the initiatives that are all for worker safety. I have a little trouble sometimes with some of the paperwork that goes along with it that really is not doing anything for worker safety other than creating paperwork. So maybe some of that part will go away. We'll see. But like I mentioned, I don't think that worker safety, this is just my opinion, but I don't think that worker safety is going to take a back seat to industry. Everybody worries about that when Republicans come in, is industry going to get their way? But like I said, you have a new Secretary of Labor that has labor backing. It's not universal labor backing, but it is some. She was actually nominated by Sean O'Brien, who's the president of the Teamsters. So, she does have that, that in her corner. I look at, on one hand, you have an administration that is focused on efficiency and what is good for industry. You have a Secretary of Labor with labor background. So it should be an interesting combination. Expecting her to take, more of a practical approach to how things unfold, not only in OSHA, but all the offices that are under the Department of Labor. Of course, we're just going to focus on OSHA here today, but, looking at how they handle regulation versus deregulation. There have been a number of new regulations that have been put out since in the last 4 years, since 2021. I look back at 2021, and we were not concerned, but we were looking, was there going to be a heat illness prevention standard? There's a proposed one, and some states already have their own state-run program or state-run regulation on that. There was something called I2P2, injury and illness prevention programs. That never did happen. There's some things about workplace violence and about infectious diseases that are proposed regulations. So we'll see how this all works out in an administration like this. A lot of times, what happens is they take a look at what outreach can be done to companies so that there's not a specific, here's how you have to do it, but more so of a, here's the item that you need to address. How you address it is up to you. But so we'll see what kind of a hands-on or hands-off approach we take. So I look at three things that tend to swing back and forth from one from one administration to the other. Regulation, outreach, and enforcement. I think I mentioned those three things earlier. Outreach, again, in a Republican administration, a lot more emphasis and a lot more resources devoted to outreach to both workers and to to businesses. Here's what hazards are. Here are methods that you can use to mitigate those risks. And enforcement doesn't go away, but it's sometimes tailored back, or they, at least if nothing else, they change priorities of enforcement. So I'm going to talk some more about that here in just a little bit. So, over these next couple years, we'll see. We'll see. Some of this stuff's going to be scrapped. Some of the things that have been proposed and have come up over the last 4 years are going to hit a pause. They'll hit a pause button just so they can review it and either keep it or tweak it. And some things will be allowed to proceed without change. So I have some more comments on that here in just a little bit. But talking again about these folks that are the main drivers in terms of what we may see from OSHA over the next couple of years. Again, Lori Chavez DeRemer, she is the confirmed Secretary of Labor, confirmed by the Senate back on March 11th. From Oregon, she was a one-term United States representative from forget what district it was in Oregon, but anyway, she had been a mayor for like 8 years in a town in Oregon, and then ran as a Republican in her district and won. Made it one term and then was unseated. You can imagine in Oregon, it's pretty heavy Democratic vote there. But in her time there, she was regarded as one of the most pro-labor Republicans in the House. Her father was a Teamster and lended her support throughout her campaign. So, I mean, it makes sense that, she had that kind of a background and that kind of approach from a lawmaking standpoint. I mentioned Sean O'Brien earlier. You folks, you followed the election, and the Teamsters were one of the few, unions, or at least major unions that came out in support of Trump. So, leading up to the election. So, whether or not this was a favor or acknowledgement of the support from the Teamsters, that remains to be said. But she was endorsed for this role by Sean O'Brien and was again nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate. Like I mentioned, her extent of labor support is not universally shared. The AFL-CIO felt that she voted more often against union and pro-worker rules and laws than for them. She had come out in support of the PRO Act, and that gets a little bit outside of OSHA here. But, so there's, again, a little bit back and forth for sure. She's expected to emphasize regulatory flexibility and employer engagement in her role in running the Department of Labor. I forgot I wanted to show this to you here real quick about the Department of Labor. This little organizational chart just kind of shows you there's a bunch of different offices that are part of the Department of Labor. Secretary of Labor is one of the cabinet positions in the president's cabinet. You will find OSHA. They are in here somewhere. They're the second to the last row on the very left. So they are down here, one of many offices or agencies, I guess a better term, that are part of the Department of Labor. So that is OSHA is one of many agencies that she will be overseeing. So I want to move on to a fella who is nominated for his role, and his role would be the head of OSHA. There's actually a formal name for that. It's called the Assistant Secretary for OSHA. But this fella had been nominated on February 11th. As of this morning, I double checked here this morning. Still no action. He had been nominated by the president and was referred then to the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee. And they have not taken action yet. So this individual is still under consideration by that committee. If he gains the necessary support out of that committee, he'll come to a full Senate vote and things will go from there. But a little bit about this fella, like I said, his name is David Keeling. He is nominated. He has experience mainly in UPS and Amazon as a safety executive. He gets worker appreciation from the fact that when he started in 1985 at UPS, he started as a package handler, as a worker on the floor, and developed into roles in the environment, health, and safety position, working his way up over years to VP of global health for UPS and director of global road and transportation. So high level positions at both Amazon and UPS. The thing about Mr. Keeling is he seems to have support not only of workers but industry. Industry appreciates his technical expertise and his practical experience. So, I know over the years that I've been doing what I do, over 30 some years, there have been times, both Republican and Democratic administration, where you have folks running Department of Labor and then OSHA with little or any practical safety experience. And that is one thing at this point that this individual, Mr. Keeling, who's been nominated to run OSHA, has. He has very much practical experience and was appreciated again on both sides of the coin, workers and industry alike. So we'll see how that goes. He's has been nominated, and the help committee needs to determine whether or not they're going to pass this through the committee and for a vote onto the Senate. So we'll see what happens over the coming months. In the meantime, we have a deputy assistant secretary for OSHA. This lady, Amanda Wood-Lehau, is an individual who is currently running OSHA until a head of OSHA is confirmed. She is the one who is running OSHA. I got a little flow chart here, organizational chart for OSHA. Now, you remember from Department of Labor, OSHA had a little block down on the second to the last row on the left. Well, if I was able to click on that block, this is what would come up. And I'm not here to give a dissertation on all these little blocks, but the main thing out of this is when you come straight down from whoever runs OSHA, which again, David Keeling's under consideration, and right now, temporarily, it's Amanda Wood-Lehau. Coming down from that, it kind of splits to the left. Two deputy assistant secretaries. Amanda Wood-Lehau is the one on the left, and a fellow named Scott Ketchum is on the right. The one on the left is more administrative things, will be responsible for the oversight of administrative functions of OSHA, administrative programs, cooperative and state programs, whistleblower protection, technical support, standards and guidance, things of that nature. And the fellow on the right, Scott Ketchum, is more so an operations person. He is overseeing the 10 different regions OSHA has, as well as the Office of Enforcement Programs and the Office or Directorate, what they call construction. So he's more of an operations person. So with that being considered, the lady who's running the administrative side and temporarily running OSHA, again, Amanda Wood-Lehau is her name. She's the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Labor for OSHA and acting head of OSHA. She is qualified and respected. She has spent a number of years both directly on the Occupational Safety and Health Review Commission, and prior to that, as a director of labor and employment policy for National Association of Manufacturers. So, she has background in safety, and she has background, litigating and fighting for, worker safety and industry-backed provisions involving employee safety and health. So she will direct OSHA's enforcement actions, regulatory approach, and engagement with employers and workers. Again, on the administrative side. You look at Scott Ketchum. He was on the right side of the OSHA flow chart there, and he's more the operations person. He's been a long time OSHA staffer and will direct OSHA's interactions, again, with with the regional offices and the other two directorates. Director of Construction Enforcement Program. So, when I back out and you look at this overall, these are folks with experience, either promoting worker safety or directly being involved in safety management or litigating safety from a review commission standpoint. So I think it's fair to say they all have experience in this field, and seems as if they would be good candidates. One is confirmed, Lori Chavez DeReamer. Amanda Wood-Lehau is appointed. She does not need to go through Senate approval. David Keeling does. He's being considered right now. Again, he's been nominated, and Scott Ketchum is in place right now as well. So that's our overview, I should say, of leadership. Moving on here to a starting point. Where are we as of now, as things get started with OSHA and the new administration? So a couple things I want to go over here. Many of you, probably all of you, are familiar that in January of every year, OSHA seems to raise its penalties, and they do. Back in 2015, the Republican House passed a law forget the name of the law, but one of the provisions, it was buried in the law. One of the provisions was that it allowed a lot of federal agencies, OSHA being one of them, to begin indexing their fines based on inflation, cost of living. Up until that point, that was not the case. The penalties assessed by OSHA were set by law by the OSHA Act. Well, in that law in 2015, again, OSHA and many other, they were allowed to do a one-time catch-up and then every year index their fine structure based on cost of living. So coming out of COVID, you folks know everything was expensive. There's still a lot of things that are expensive, but for a while the fine increases were like 6.6% and 7.6%, or 6.8. It was something like that, 6 and 7%. So they were large increases. This past year in January, OSHA announced it would raise by 2.6%. I think it was like 2.598 or something like that. But anyway, 2.6%. And again, that's when you see, I typically see this later in the fall. You hear about what Social Security is going to go up or down for the upcoming year. Cost of living, it's usually right on that number, or right real close to it. So this is what it turned out to be. You can see right here what the maximum penalties are now. Again, many of you familiar with the different gravities of citations OSHA can issue. Serious and other serious are the most common. The last I checked, serious citations make up roughly 75% of OSHA citations that are issued. Other than serious, closer to 20%. And then the remaining between posting requirements, failure to abate, willful, and repeat. But you can see there, I mean, a serious violation, $16,550 is the maximum. One of the things, I'll go through what this graph is here in a minute, but two things I wanted to point out here about these fine increases. Number one is that reductions. I mean, if a company gets a fine, and for a serious fine, they have an area director has charts that tell them how expensive the fine is based on how serious the injury could be as a result of that hazard, and how likely the hazard is to create an accident or an injury. So it doesn't automatically start at 16,550. It starts at a certain number. The more serious it is, the higher the number. But then there's reductions for size of company, good faith, and prior history that are applied, and that varies from one company to the other. Those reductions continue to remain in place as they always have. The reductions are different for willful repeat violations. That's another story for another day, but those reductions are still in place. But the other bullet point you might have noticed on what I just had up there was that even simple things are expensive. Personally, as a safety director, I see that. It bothers me. It was a few years ago, was 2.5 years ago to be exact. I had one company, we're staring down a fine of $4,000 because we were missing a no smoking sign on the diesel tank. And I mean, there's a lot to this story, which I don't have time to go over, but what my conversations with OSHA is, look, we could have a smoking party around the diesel tank and it's not going to catch on fire in central Pennsylvania in October. But it is what it is. The rule, the law that OSHA has, it's a refueling station, it needs to have it. And so it is what it is. We were able to get it down to $1,000, but still, that's a lot of money for a sticker. And when I look at these penalty increases, yeah, they're designed to get our attention, but over these last couple of years, even simple things can get expensive. So that's one takeaway I have. It's not going to change. It technically January of every year, OSHA, the fines could go up or down, but I've not seen cost of living go down in quite some time. So the trend is what it is. Some of these things, willful and repeat violations, get into pretty serious things. Repeat violation, your company has been cited for the same or similar violation within the past 5 years. Does not have to be the same job site, does not have to be the same superintendent or foreman. Again, and just because we did something a second time doesn't mean it'll be cited repeat, but if it is, those fines are more expensive. It's not saying it's going to be $165,000, but it's going to be more expensive. And of course, if you get into willful violations, those are things the company knew or should have known of, and didn't take action. It doesn't necessarily mean it's with bad intent, but they're pretty salty for good reason. Not a lot of citations. It's usually around 2% of their citations are willful, usually less than 5% are repeat. So you don't see those often, but they are out there, and they are not cheap. Um, Looking at this, this kind of gives you this is a busy it's a busy chart, but I wanted to be able to overlap three things that you can look at from a trend standpoint and draw some of your own conclusions. And let me explain what I got going on here. Probably the easiest thing to follow is the solid red line. The solid red line, I guess I should put there you go. You should see the legend at the bottom. The solid red line tracks construction fines. Fines that are strictly issued in the construction industry. So this goes back over roughly 15 years. And you can see the past fiscal year, OSHA and government's fiscal year runs October 1 to October 1. They're up to 119,000. I'm sorry, let's try that again. 119 million, big difference. But it's the most construction has ever had. You can see the trends that are in place there. So that's just construction alone. You look at the dashed blue line. The dashed blue line is the number of federal OSHA inspections. So that's all the inspections OSHA has conducted over the past 15 years. It's not just construction specific like the red line is. Red line is construction specific fines. The blue line is all of OSHA's inspections. And finally, the black dashed line there is construction, the number of citations issued to the construction industry. Now, there's a little gap in there between like 2019, 2020. Those were COVID years. I don't have those numbers. So I do have a note there on here that notes COVID-19. You see a dip in all of those. And that was COVID-19 time. And that's the reason for the dip. The one last thing that I'll mention from this is you see basically a pair of uprights. If you're a football fan, see a pair of uprights there. And those uprights I put in there were basically the years of Trump's first term in office, and you get a chance to see how things responded. The number of inspections, OSHA inspections, was pretty flat. Number of construction citations pretty flat again until we hit the COVID years. There was a trend upward in number of fines. A lot of people think fines went down in his first administration. They did not. Now there's a lot of factors at play at that, but anyway, you see what the trend was here, and then coming out of COVID here over the last couple of years to the right, you can see what some of the trends are. So we'll track that. I mean, I look at this, what maybe do I expect here over the next 4 years? Flat, maybe slightly fewer inspections, probably about the same number of citations. And we'll see. I don't know that I'm overly optimistic that you'll see a big drop in fines, but hey, I could be wrong. Who knows? Just going over what we've seen here in the past. Department of Government Efficiency is going to have something to say about that, and I'm going to talk about them here in just a second. So anyway, that information, you can see how things are kind of trending and where they may go. There's one other thing I want to mention before I get into Doge. I'm going to show you a map here a little bit later that just shows what states in the United States are governed by federal OSHA and which are state administered. Roughly half the states in the United States have their own state-run programs. I know I live here in Pennsylvania. Maryland's not too far down the line. Maryland, Virginia, the Carolinas have state-run programs. So, their rules can be a little different than federal OSHA. They do have to be at least as effective. And the one thing I'm kind of noting here is these state-administered OSHA programs are required to adopt maximum penalty levels that are at least as effective as OSHA's. So, you're looking at changes in those areas. It's not saying that they're reductions. I know in Maryland, it seems reductions are much more than they are here in Pennsylvania, but the overall starting level of fines is the same as what it is here in Pennsylvania. So wanted to make that mention. Workforce reduction starting point. And of course, got to pretty much be living in a shell without Wi-Fi to not know what Doge is and what they're up to here throughout the government. Two things in particular. One on February 22nd, Doge sends out an email to federal workers that they need to document 5 things that they accomplished in the past week. And, it went out to many federal workers. Some agencies told their people to ignore it, many didn't. And to my knowledge, OSHA is not one of the ones that said ignore it. As a matter of fact, about 2.5 weeks ago, one of the folks that I work with, one of the companies I work with as a safety director, we had an OSHA inspection, and the fellow, this was here in Pennsylvania, the fellow spent some time there. He spent a little more time than what we are accustomed OSHA to finding. This was a Dodge Report inspection, by the way, nothing we did wrong. It's just one of those programmed inspections that they have, but spent a lot of time there. And he was telling our superintendent, yeah, we got an email here, 5 things we did in the past week, and basically justify what we do. And I mean, if you look at the bullet point here at the bottom of your screen, it says, if you were an inspector, what might this mean to you? You got to document 5 things you accomplished in the past week. And, I could be wrong on this, but I know what my thinking is. If I'm an inspector and I got to document things and try to preserve my job, am I out there writing fine citations? I think it's logical to say OSHA is going to see a reduction in staffing. I know in the last Trump administration, they did see that, although that was mostly through attrition. A lot of folks that left or retired, and they just weren't replaced. Right now, if you look at the second paragraph, I have a couple of days after this Doge email, February 26th, the White House Office of Management and Budget sends out a memo to all federal agencies directing them to reduce the number of agency employees by eliminating positions. I would hope they mean redundant positions, but I'm sure the word redundant was probably not used, but eliminating positions through retirement, early retirement, reducing budgets, voluntary leave and buyouts and things like that. So, we'll see how that works. I think it's a foregone conclusion that, OSHA is going to be dealing with fewer people. So maybe good, maybe, I hope it doesn't affect the overall mission of OSHA in terms of making sure workers have a safe place. But if it gets rid of redundancy, I don't think anybody's got a big problem with that. But unless you're one of those people. But what you do have is you have people out there having to justify their job, and that kind of concerns me a little bit from a safety director standpoint. Are these inspections going to last longer? Is it a foregone conclusion that we're looking at a citation? And I'm telling you, you folks all know this. I don't care whose job site we go to. We can find something. There is something there. May not be major, but there is no job site that's perfect. And I am concerned, is it going to be more of this business where we're worried about, these little stickers and stuff like that? I don't know. In fairness, the no smoking sticker has nothing to do with what's going on right now. It's a separate thing at a separate time. But, these are just things that, who knows how this is going to be taken. But we do know this. In the past, OSHA has done as much, if not more, with fewer people and fewer resources, and it can happen again. So what that guy was saying just kind of spooked me a little bit from, what's going on? There's going to be citations, because that was one of the next questions our superintendent asked. Well, will there be citations here? And his response was most likely. So, there were some things that he pointed out that were subcontract related that I could certainly see to be a citation, but we'll see where this goes. I have not gotten the report on that yet, so we'll see what happens. Word has been that a number of OSHA personnel, particularly assistant area directors, have accepted buyouts. And again, that these are candidates where they just, their positions may not be replaced. I know here in Harrisburg area OSHA office, in times past, it was usually an area director and 2 assistant area directors. Is that going to shrink to 1? Are they going to have assistant area directors? I don't know. So we'll see how that plays out. But the one thing I am worried about a little bit is when we're cutting people that have been there for a while. I'm all for cutting. I'm all for making things a little more, streamlined. But I do worry about losing experienced people and people that we have built a relationship with. Now, a lot of you folks, you travel all over the country for work, and you perhaps don't have the degree of local relationships with your local area offices that companies that work more locally do, within a 50 or 100-mile radius. But I do look at that. I mean, so you're going to have less experienced people coming in. which now we got to start building relationships and trust with people who have not been there very long. I'm worried now with this, are we taking efficiency too far where things become hurried and helter skelter to where there are ineffective or inaccurate protocols? And again, the disappearance of relationships. I don't know that this is going to come to fruition, but these are things that time's going to tell. It's going to depend on on who's in our area offices, how many people, how long have they been there, is the buyout something they're going to accept? All these things will play a role. So, bottom line, OSHA's not going to disappear. They'll certainly have to do more with less. I'm quite sure of that. But in the past, they have done the same thing, and citations remain consistent, and penalties actually rose. When it comes to standards, I'm actually going to put both of these here on your screen. Excuse me. There's a lot of things going on that are carryover from a previous administration. As a matter of fact, over on the right-hand side, it says in the oven. Twice every year in the fall and the spring, there's something that comes out. It's called a unified agenda. It's basically an agenda of what different departments hope to accomplish through the year. Doesn't mean they will, but there's final stage things. There's proposed. There's notice of proposed rulemaking, and OSHA is one of these agencies as a part of it. There's a few things that have reached final stage. The first one says COVID-19 in healthcare. Now, that doesn't really affect us in construction, but I will say this. If you look to the left of the things that have been scrapped or diminished, that's the first one. This just came out recently. My wife is she's a cardiac care nurse, and so she's in a healthcare standing, but or healthcare setting, I'm sorry. But, the COVID-19 and healthcare standard has been scrapped. Now, it has been scrapped in favor of a broader standard involving infectious disease. COVID-19 just had to do with COVID-19. But what's the next thing to come in, hopefully no less than another 100 years or whatever? Who knows? But it's designed to protect that, or designed to be designed to encompass all that, the infectious disease, not just COVID, but other things. So COVID-19 in healthcare went bye-bye and has been absorbed by infectious disease standard, which now faces an uncertain future. It's something that it's one of the things that the current administration is going to take a look at. Final rule stage, again, over to the right, PPE in construction. This came out back in December. It was pretty minor. I don't know that this is going to change at all, but it was just a statement. There was a statement in general industry PPE that was not in construction. It says PPE has got to fit properly. That sentence was added to construction back in December. There's also a final rule stage for forklift, powered industrial truck design standard, just updating it with references to more current ANSI updates. I think the previous one was 1969. So they're trying to update that a little bit. We'll see if anything happens with that. If you look at the things that are in the oven that are the second grouping, they're all proposed rules. These are things that are currently proposed by OSHA that are under consideration. They're not final yet. And the ones that I have in red are the ones that I think are possible of hitting the pause. OSHA's possibly going to hit the pause button on, or there's a pretty decent possibility of them doing so. They could be scrapped, but most likely they're going to hit the pause button and prevent continued regulatory process until they have a chance to review it and determine, is this what we want? Do we need to scrap it, or do we just need to make changes? So again, I think heat, illness, injury and illness prevention is one of them. I'm going to comment more on that here in a little bit. I think WPV is workplace violence. Again, that's not so much in construction. It's more in healthcare and social assistance. That's one of them. Proposed rule having to do with protection of emergency responders to accidents and incident scenes, chemical emergencies, transportation emergencies, natural emergencies, things like that. Again, not really affecting construction too much. And then the infectious disease I mentioned before. So those are all four that have been mentioned for possible either being thrown out or at the very least hitting the pause button to see if this is what we want. The biggest one affecting us is heat, injury, and illness prevention. There's a couple other ones there that are less controversial, but again, may suffer the same fate about the pause button. We all know there's a silica rule out there. This proposal adds revisions to add a medical removal protection. It's possible that one gets scrapped. There are medical removal provisions for things like lead and asbestos. I'm not sure about asbestos. I think so. I don't get into that too much, but I know for lead for sure. And they're looking for something for people who have overexposure to silica. They're looking for something there. So we'll see how that works. The proposed rule with welding in confined spaces, I don't think is too controversial. They're just looking, there's things in the welding standard that need to be updated so that they coincide with what the construction confined space standard talks about. Lockout tagout has somewhat to do with construction, but mainly they're addressing technological advancements to lockout tagout. That's probably not a bad thing, so that might survive. New standard for communication tower safety and some amendments to clarifications to the crane standard, particularly with particularly with power lines. So we'll see. We'll see what all happens with those. But some of those things, like I said, are most likely to hit the pause button. There's a few things over to the left that I want to mention here, and then before I move on to the last segment here, you look at the 4 bullet points to the left of things that are probably going to get scrapped or diminished. COVID-19 part already was, I mentioned that. Most of you folks at the end of the year have to submit your 300A data to OSHA electronically on their portal. Okay, in construction, if you have 20 or more people at any one point during the prior year, you got to do that. Well, that's a point of contention. I know it's supposed to serve good, but I don't see what significant good that it does or has done. I know the case for it, but I don't know that it has. So that is something that's likely to get scrapped or at least changed. I could be wrong, but we'll see. I know it's a hot button amongst a lot of people, as is you folks may or may not know this information and the information of folks who have to report serious injuries, fatalities, inpatient hospitalization, amputation, loss of eye. Those last 3 things within 24 hours of the incident. There's a database of that, and both of these databases are accessible to the public on OSHA. They do data dumps. So that's controversial as well. That could be scrapped also, as well as some of you are familiar with the union walk around rule, where a facility or a company would not have to have union people, but would have to allow union people to do a walk around if employee or employee reps request that. So that's something that's liable to get massaged or possibly eliminated as well. So those are all things that are kind of in the near term that are being looked over and being reviewed. So I have one sentence down here at the bottom under hitting the pause. I gave the example for the heat rule, about these ones that are likely to hit the pause button. For example, it is possible this proposed heat standard for federal OSHA. Again, some states already have it. This is for federal OSHA. It's possible that the proposed heat standard could be pared back or even scrapped in favor of a continued outreach and enforcement process through use of the general duty clause. That's how OSHA's been doing it, up until this point. They do outreach and education, but if there's something that occurs where, especially if somebody's been hospitalized or killed as a result of heat, and the company did not take reasonable action to prevent that, the citation under the general duty clause could be issued. Now, it gets into a long conversation, time we don't have, but it's how things have been handled. So again, if they hit pause, they may rely on this process that's been in place to continue on. All right. So that leaves me to the tea leaves here. Just a number of things here that I just want to kind of go over here. I got about 10 minutes or so here to go over a couple things. Listen, these statistics over here are just statistics. And what I might do is when I finish up here is put some of this in a PDF that I can get to Sasha, and we can get out. That just gives you some of this to look over if you'd like. I know a number of you folks have had, especially out my way here, have had going through OSHA 10s and 30s with me, and when you do, you'll recognize this. The stuff's in the manuals I use that talks about fatality rates for construction industry wise, fatality rates for industry and fatality rate trends overall. The one thing I wanted to mention here, the red line is construction. And this represents how many fatalities per 100,000 people. You'll notice over the past more than decade, it's been pretty flat. We've in the early part of the 2000s, we saw a nice decrease in in fatalities in construction industry, but over the past 12, 15 years hasn't changed much. So we'll see. That's it from my standpoint. That's why this still continues to happen. You look at the industries. OSHA has jurisdiction over about half a dozen different industries. Construction's one of them. It accounts for a lot of their time and efforts, number of inspections and number of fines. And that's why construction about close to 5% of America's workforce, but 20% of fatalities. It's a big difference. That's why they pay attention to construction. So I don't think that's really going to change. Again, initiatives and how they go about inspections may change. But listen, another chart here. Again, I call this one the donut of death or whatever, but every year I update these charts. It's stuff I don't make up. It comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Ever since I've started tracking this years ago, falls have been number one, and not by a little, but by a lot. I think it's realistic to assume fall protection is going to continue to be a big part of their enforcement strategy. It has been. I want to show you something here. I'm just going to scroll over for a minute. This shows you the top 30 most frequently cited for construction. All right. And if you look at the first thing, it says fall protection, failure to provide or use. As a matter of fact, if you go down through the top 10, there's no less than 4 times when fall protection becomes applicable. So it's a lot. It's a big part of their enforcement strategy, understandably. When you got one particular hazard that's a source of death of 40% of the people who are killed in construction, that's going to gather attention. Right now, OSHA has these things called national emphasis programs. There are many. The ones that I think most closely affect the construction industry: fall protection, excavation and trenching, respirable crystalline silica, heat illness, lead, and hexavalent chromium, like especially welding stainless steel. And listen, when something's called a national emphasis program, you don't have to think too much to understand if it's a national emphasis program, they're all looking at this stuff. It's important, and they're not going to ignore it if it's on your job. As a matter of fact, excavation and trenching, that particular emphasis program says to the inspector, look, if you're driving down the road and you see equipment digging, it don't matter. It does not matter if it is an unsafe trench or not, or even if you can't tell, you pull in and you make sure it's safe. Doesn't matter. So, I look at it this way. If we're erecting a metal building, we're working on site, we may not be doing trenching and excavation, but if there's equipment on site, that makes our site more likely to get visited. But, these other emphasis programs are important to OSHA, therefore they need to be important to us. Maybe we'll talk some more about some of these things in the session that I'm at in here in a couple of weeks down in Charlotte. But there's a lot to talk about, and especially when it comes to the heat illness prevention one. In addition to these national programs, there are also what's called regional emphasis programs. I just want to switch screens here a minute. This is either going to work wonderfully or be a disaster. All right, it worked all right. And the link that I have there takes you to this page. And these are regional emphasis programs. So depending what state you're in, you can see along the left-hand side there, Boston, for example, and the Boston area the Boston region includes Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Vermont. I'm in the Philadelphia region with Pennsylvania. My daughters live in Georgia, so they would be in the Atlanta one, and so forth. But you can click on those. I'll just click on Philadelphia here because that's where I'm at. And these add additional ones that these states, and districts, DC, Delaware, Maryland, PA, Virginia, West Virginia, these are additional ones. So from my standpoint, folks in my area here, we're looking at demo activities as well. So again, that link will take you to this page if you're not familiar with it, where you can also see not only the national emphasis programs, but also but the regional emphasis programs there as well. Now, with that being said, I did want to show you this picture right here. I was talking about state-run programs earlier, and this gives you a chance to see all the states that are light-colored. Pennsylvania is one of them. About half of the states, we're federal OSHA. Okay, we follow federal OSHA's rule. The states that are medium blue, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and to the west and in other places, you have your own state-run programs. And again, I know with steel and metal buildings, you folks are all over the place. If I have a company here in Pennsylvania and we are going to Wyoming to do a job, okay, we're headed out there. I look, and Wyoming's a state program. It would behoove me to, as a safety director, to Google Wyoming OSHA regulations, and that will bring up any state-specific regulations that Wyoming has that may be different from federal OSHA. A lot of these states, theirs are very similar, if not identical to federal OSHA, with a couple changes, but it becomes important. I know, again, personally, down in Maryland, there is a heat standard in effect now. So here in a couple weeks, when it starts to get heat index over 80, this stuff's going to start, coming into play. It's not here in Pennsylvania yet, directly, and indirectly it is by that heat emphasis program, but in Maryland it is. So again, as you travel to different states, just kind of a little bit of an understanding of, what are we getting into here? What, or do they have special rules that we gotta be aware of? State specific rules. Outreach. These are things, I just read about this here a few weeks ago. You may have noticed, actually, I'm going to zoom this in a second. Number 2, most cause of death in construction, vehicle road accidents. Back in the end of January, OSHA partnered with a couple organizations to promote motor vehicle safety. So there's some information there. They did not indicate that there's any specific enforcement program going on, but this is just information to help call attention to this hazard and help employers, manage this risk. Same with heat, same with mental health and suicide prevention, same with opioids, same with workplace violence. Okay, things that are not regulated directly yet, they're working on it with heat, but that outreach is a part of OSHA's deal. I mean, I talk about this, and we'll probably talk a little bit about this in Charlotte, but look at what number 3 is. Number 3, in looking at this over the last 30 years, it wasn't that long ago. Drugs and overdose were not on there. Right now, what this chart is saying is that the number 3 cause of death on a construction job site is overdose, and a lot of it's opioids. And I look back there to 4% is WPV, workplace violence. A lot of that in construction is suicide on the job. So, and these don't even capture, these incidents that have occurred off the job. So they're huge issues right now. And these are issues that that OSHA continues to at least provide outreach on. Over here, and again, I'll include this as I'm just about out of time here. So I'll include this in the PDF, the top 30 most frequently cited for construction. You can take a look at it. I will pair that with another one. You'll notice this one at the top says construction industry. I will also provide another one that says structural steel and precast. That's the one pre-engineered metal building folks would be under. The sample size is not not as great, but still gives you some information. I don't look for these to change too much, but I will say this. Although silica is not a big part of what our exposures are, it's definitely on the radar scope. You look on the left there, it's number 10 most frequently cited now. We don't have a lot of exposure, but it's there. I'll include this as well. This is something I put out every year and update it. There you go. There's, the number of fines, fall protection, and folks that are new to, new foremen, new superintendents, especially when I do these 10 and 30-hour programs, we talk about this. If you're a new superintendent, what does OSHA look at? I mean, there's a lot of OSHA regs. There's a whole bunch of them, and that can get your head spinning. But when you're somebody new to this, you look at this and say, look, 5 to 7 items are the bulk of their fine, of their citations. I'll look at the one on the left, citations. Fall protection scaffolds, almost half of them. And by the way, aerial lifts and scissor lifts are considered scaffolds by OSHA. You throw in ladders, look at PPE, excavation, electrical, silica. There you go. There's 79%. We might as well call it 80% of the fines are in those couple areas. So I think that's going to continue. A few last things I just want to mention in closing. There have been questions about hard hats and helmets. OSHA is not throwing out, OSHA, let me phrase it this way. OSHA is not requiring companies to go out and buy the helmets. They put out a memorandum a little over a year ago calling people's attention to, hey, these helmets are out there. They're nice. They really provide a lot better protection than what some of the old hard hats do. But it's, and they said, we're even getting them for our inspectors, but it stops short of saying you got to do it. So don't get me wrong. They're great. They're really nice. Some people love them. Some people hate them. But it's not a requirement. It's not at this time. It's not, and it's no word that it's going to be. Class 1 and Class 2 retractables very quickly. We're used to Class A and B, but back in, I think it was 2021, ANSI updated fall protection standards. Now these retractables are Class 1 and Class 2. Class 1 retractables are designed for attachment at or above the dorsal D ring. Most of our folks are in scissor lifts or aerial lifts. Aerial lifts were required to be tied off. Scissor lifts, OSHA doesn't require it, but many of your projects might. If you are tied off at or let me say it this way, if you are tied off below your dorsal D ring, which in any of those lifts is going to be the case, or you're tied off to steel, it's got to be Class 2. Those are the only one of those two classes that are okay to tie off below your D ring. So OSHA has not come out specifically and identified Class 1 and Class 2 retractables. They're more general. They're asking you if you're tying off as a personal fall arrest system or a fall restraint system, and then they're expecting you to follow the specifications set forth by the manufacturer of the product. So, just wanted to kind of throw that out there. Last thing here, few inspectors changing OSHA, but OSHA is not the number one reason we do safety. The way I figured it's the very best number 3. We do safety number 1 to send our folks home at the end of the day. We work to survive and provide, and that's why we do safety. Number 2, safety is good business. If it's good business, that means we're not wasting money on fines. We're not wasting money on higher premiums and things of that nature, where we not only have to throw money at that problem, but we got to fix the underlying problem to begin with. It's good business sense for OSHA to take a prominent role in our business structure. And yeah, I'm a safety director. I don't like to see OSHA on the site any more than anybody else, but they have an important role. And at the end of the day, they want what I want, which is everybody going home at the end of the day. They're an important reason we do safety, but I put them at number 3, just because I think the other 2 are that much more important. Many of you folks have pre-qualifications and insurance requirements and stringent job site requirements to have to meet. That those things are not going to go away. So just keeping that in mind as you make changes. So I appreciate you folks tuning in. I guess we got it all squeezed in here, and I hope I see you folks. Stop up and say hi to me. I'll be there Friday, for Friday's presentation, and I'm looking forward to it. Thanks, everybody, and thank you, Sasha.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it, Craig, for giving us this update, what's going on in OSHA so far. And I love the tea leaves as well. That's great. And we will see you in Charlotte. If anyone has any questions, you can always reach out to me and I can put you in touch with Craig. And once we get this recording, we'll send it out to all of you as well. And hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.